So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening with the Vision Australia Library for our second In Conversation for 2022. We've got this with Eliza Hull and Ben and Leah Venpopple. The Vision Australia Library acknowledges the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, the traditional owners of the land on which we're broadcasting from today, as well as the owners of the lands from where you are all joining. We pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging, recognising their rich history over tens of thousands of years as the original storytellers of this land. We commit to the telling of First Nations stories and support the traditions of oral storytelling. My name is Leanne Sajadi, and I am the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Vision Australia Library. We are a national public library service for people who are blind, low vision, or have a print disability. We welcome many of our members here, as well as Vision Australia staff and volunteers and friends of our community. As a library service for people with a disability, we're proud to have the book, which is the focus of tonight's conversation, We've Got This, available to borrow now in Daisy Audio. We've Got This was edited by Eliza and includes the story of 25 parents who identify as deaf, disabled, or chronically ill, and includes a powerful contribution from Ben and Leah, whose story we will be learning more about tonight. Eliza Hull is a musician, writer, and disability advocate based in regional Victoria. She has a physical disability called Charcot-Marie-Tooth. When she embarked on her parenting journey and found her doctor was not supportive, she sought out the stories of other disabled parents, creating the ABC podcast We've Got This, and eventually editing the published anthology, which was released earlier this year. Leah and Ben Venpopple will be well known to our community. Leah is chair of the Victorian Community Advisory Council and a board member of the National Disability Insurance Agency. She's highly respected for her collaborative leadership, governance and policy development across disability rights, working at state and national levels over the last decade, with roles including former CEO of Women with Disabilities Victoria and chair of the National Disability and Carer Alliance. Ben is a blind lawyer and disability advocate who's currently working for Legal Aid and has written for SBS and ABC. So tonight's conversation will be hosted by Vildana, who is the manager of the Vision Australia Library. The event is being recorded and will be made available via our website. You're welcome to share questions and comments, which you can do via the chat function, which we'll be able to get to at the end of tonight. If you're using the Zoom function with a screen reader, you can access the chat using Alt-H. Comments and questions will be visible to all participants. And if you prefer to send questions by email, you can do so. You can send your questions to library@visionaustralia.org. I'm now delighted to welcome Vildana, Eliza, and Leah.
Thank you.
And
hi,
Ben,
everyone.
who's joined us.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Eliza, Leah, and Ben. Let's get into it. So becoming a parent is not an easy decision, but also not just that it's a challenging thing to do regardless of whether you have disability or not. The sleep deprivation, you're trying to figure out, in particular those early days for the first time, what on earth you're doing, how to figure out the feeding, how to figure out, I guess, how to look after a baby when it's unwell, and the skin rash, or when they starting to make their first steps. There's just so many things to work through, and adding disability in a mix certainly doesn't make things easier. I remember when I became a parent for the first time, which was 4 years ago, you kind of reach out for the information that's kind of available at the tip of your fingers, which is, usually in your phone, Googling, reading forums, blogs, reading books. And I just couldn't find a parent like me at all, parent with vision loss. And it was particularly difficult to navigate things like breastfeeding. How did you navigate those early days? How did you kind of go about looking after yourself and the baby, and making sure that you kind of keep up the positive spirits despite everything? So maybe Eliza, I'll start with you.
Hi, how you going? My name's Eliza. It's so lovely to be here tonight. So thank you so much, everybody. I guess, how did I do it? I think you're right. I think it's very daunting, and it's just a constant learning process, isn't it? Every day is different. And I guess that's why I often say that I feel like being a person with disability, that we actually are really good at it, because we've, all our lives had to, be great problem solvers and be adaptable and find solutions. And so I think that's just really the way that I did it. Every day was different. And there was some days where I struggled. I remember that, the first time in hospital with my first daughter, and being asked whether I'd like to give my daughter a bath. And I was just too frightened because of my disability affects my hands, and it affects my balance. And so I wish, looking back, that I should have really just been honest and said, is there a way that we can adapt here? Is there a way that I could give my daughter a bath while I sit down? Or but I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to advocate for myself. But when I got home, I found this incredible bath that enabled me to, safely give my daughter a bath. And it was, just like a great piece of technology where she was able to be sat in and laid inside it, so that it meant that I could do it. And I guess that's just the way I've really done things. I've used certain little bits of technology to adapt, but also just known my body and known my limitations. And so, for instance, I've now got a second child, and the way that we get downstairs is we just go one by one on our bottoms, and just in a safe way. And I lean up against the car to get my child out of the car so that I'm stable. And so I guess, for me, it's just been a big amount of adaptability and problem solving and figuring things out along the way. But I think that all parenting really requires that. So I think that, as I say, I feel like we are really just kind of set up to be great parents because of that skills that we've acquired along the way.
Absolutely. What about you, Leah and Ben? How were those early days, months, except from being sleep deprived, obviously, but just kind of figuring out how to do this and having blindness?
Do you want to go first, or shall I?
I can go first.
Yeah, go
on. First of all, hello everyone. Lovely to be invited to this forum. For myself, what Eliza actually said resonated very strongly with me to a degree. The life of a disabled person lends itself to someone who solves problems, and in that sense, you are set up in some, not necessarily to do it better or worse, but to have the bumps ironed out for you along the way. Importantly, I think that was how I considered parenting when we first became parents, is that I know about as much about parenting as the able-bods do when they start out. Ultimately, we all come up with our own different ways of doing things, and that varies from family to family, whether or not there's disability involved. So there was no particular stigma attached to having to do things any particular way. I like to think that we both just did things the best way for us, used certain amounts of common sense. Of course, the hive mind. There are a number of blind parents out there, and we were able to tap in with those groups as well, and they had sort of invariably had some kind of spectrum of advice to give us on if we had a question to ask. But on the whole, it's like a lot of things in life. You just discover, gosh, I've been parenting for the last 3 months, and you sort of realise that you're doing it after you've already done it for a while. And in that sense, I wonder whether our experience of coming to our own competency as parents would be much different if we'd had the disability or not.
I think
Agree. Sorry, you go, Leah.
no, that's all right. I think I felt like we came into it kind of knowing, as Ben said, that, you know, whether you have a disability or not, kind of you always have to figure things out. And we did that because we had blind friends who had children. And I don't know, we'd never really had any particular kind of technical discussions with them about, well, how did you do this or that?
No.
But you just, you come to it with the realisation that this is possible. And we'd seen it in families who had different levels of sight and different kind of combinations. And you just, you know, whether children had vision impairments as well or didn't. And you just kind of having that background level knowledge of it's possible was really empowering and helpful. And then when we stumbled upon some things where we had to solve problems, like Max was formula fed, and we had to work out how to get the right amount of boiling hot water into a very tiny bottle and mix up the formula correctly. And at first we tried syringes, and then we realised after a little while that there was actually a 10 ml kind of area of give at the top of the syringe. We didn't know that until somebody else looked at the syringe for us. And maternal child health nurse said it's probably better that it's been a bit more diluted rather than being too concentrated. But we were then looking for another solution. And some people we knew said, oh, there's this parenting group on Facebook called Blind Parents Alliance. Go and ask the question there. So we both joined that. We both asked the question. We got a few different possible solutions, one of which ended up being really great for us. And that was, you can get like these, almost like a coffee machine, but it's for formula, and it's designed for really tired parents. So you press one button, like, and it says, you know, and then it's the next step in the process, and you press the button again, and then it's the next step, and it gives you a bit of time between those steps, and it measures out it just puts hot water in. You shake it, and then it puts more hot water in, and that is your formula done at the right level for the number of scoops you've put in.
It's called the Tommy Tippy Perfect Prep Machine for anyone who's interested, and there's looking for something like it to buy, but I'm sure there are a number of them like it on the market. So by all means, look around. Things might have come
Moved
along
on.
since then.
No, absolutely. Any tips, advice you can share, please do so. I'm sure there are lots of parents with young children, but also people that might be considering kind of embarking on that parenting journey. And certainly talking about that, reflecting on my decision to become a parent was a long coming one. I have acquired vision loss, and certainly I felt, well, I questioned myself, can I do it? Today it's easy because, you know, I've been through it twice, and, you know, I feel pretty confident in what I do. But upon reflection, I realized that actually I've internalized a lot of low expectations, I guess, held by the society for people with disability. And medical system didn't help either. I remember when I kind of was referred to a hospital, straight away genetics department was involved and a social worker, and I was like, why why on earth do I need this? I just came here to have a baby. And it was kind of like a by default position, and I felt like I was the other. I know, Eliza, you have an interesting story with your neurologist. I don't know if you want to share a bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that is, again, my experience as well. I remember, I mean, as a child and growing up, I lived in a family that, you know, the word disability wasn't used, but still I felt very accepted in my family and felt like, you know, I could do anything that my sister could do. And I guess I just felt like I wasn't treated differently. And so I grew up in that kind of idea that whatever I want, it's possible. And so I always thought that having a family could be something I wanted and could do. But when I met my partner, I went to see my neurologist, who I'd been seeing, you know, for a very long time, because I have had my disability since I was a child. And he met me with saying that he didn't think that I could manage and he didn't think it was a good idea. And because my disability, I could pass it on, that is not a good idea and problematic. And have I thought about other options? Ultimately, he was very afraid of the idea of me having a child, was trying to talk me away from that idea and talk me against it. And I just remember feeling a lot of shame and vulnerability. And I think that we are taught to trust medical professionals. And I really, for that moment, did believe him, and luckily had a very supportive partner that just brought me back and just said, this is not the way it needs to be, and that we can do this, and you will make a great mother. And luckily I didn't listen to my neurologist, because now I have a family, and of course the society does create and still does create many barriers that disabled people and disabled parents face. But ultimately, I feel like I really bring a lot to my family by having a disability, and glad that I chose to have kids. But I think that for me, that's really was one of the reasons that I really wanted to create a book like this, was to try and change the attitudes and assumptions, and just really the discrimination that still exists, especially within the medical spaces, that many, if not all, of the parents within this book have faced.
Honestly, I think this book should be kind of a compulsory read for all the medical professionals as a part of their study. Leah, I know you also had an interesting story to tell in the book. You were talking about when you've had miscarriage. I don't know if you want to just share a bit of your experience, and then, of course, how was that kind of how did you go through that, and just going to the hospital? And I know the ambulance story was pretty, painful.
Yeah, we had, sometimes with disability, I feel like you get the best and the worst of people. You get the extremes, and we had both in this experience. So we had an awful experience with the ambulance, an awful experience with the nurse, and then a great experience with a social worker, which is surprising given my track record with them. But the ambulance, so the miscarriage happened and we called an ambulance, and they came to pick us up. And of course, I had my seeing eye dog, Lisa, at home, and the two ambulance drivers who came said, "Oh, we can't take the dog. We're not allowed to take dogs." And so we're in the middle of a situation where Ben and I are quite distressed. And I, had no sense of how urgent it was that they get me to a hospital. So we just said, she's a guide dog. She's allowed to come anywhere. Oh, we don't know where we would put her. Well, can you call back to base? Oh, no, we don't think we'll do that. And if we did, we don't think the hospital would take her. And so we ended up having to call friends in the middle of the night, and sort of say, you live close by, we know you're not dog people, but here, can you come and take our dog? That meant that, in the middle of going through some procedures, I then got a call from the friends going, we hope you're okay, but by the way, what do you want me to do with your dog? Like, does she need food? Where do we need to put her to sleep? Is there anything we need to do? And so it added to what was already, frankly, a pretty traumatic event. It took me a while because it was so associated with the trauma of the miscarriage, but I did actually make a complaint to Ambulance Victoria. And for anyone listening tonight who has to go in an ambulance in Victoria, not only do they have an anchor point in the front footwell where you can tether a dog, they also have spare harnesses.
Good on you, Leah.
They had them already, but the staff who came didn't know, and they didn't check. And so we got an apology from Ambulance Victoria, and I would assume that they then went back and did some further training with their staff. But did you want to talk about the good experience that you had in the hospital?
Yeah, why not? Let's balance things out. Because of course, this was late at night. I couldn't stay in the hospital. Of course, I had to go home, and then came back the next morning at about 8:30, and I guess mine is sort of a combination of it. It starts bad and ends good, because Leah was on the ward at that stage, and came in, and there was this dreadful nurse who was just almost a caricature of how of how to be sort of patronising and domineering. You know, you couldn't have written the character any better. And quite apart from her behaviour to us, she then queried the bed next door, who was a Chinese couple, whether their marriage was arranged or not. That's how bad she was. Anyway, she has taken a look at us and gone, "Oh, do you do all right at home?" We're fine at home, thanks. We do everything fine. Oh, I'll just see if I can find a social worker to come and speak to you. And we, oh God, you know, it's just absolute. You know, this is just going to be a nightmare. And along came Jan, the social worker. The fates be kind to Jan, the social worker at Box Hill Hospital, who within about 2 minutes ascertained that there actually wasn't anything at all that we needed help with at home, and that the best. And she sort of said, "What can I be of any assistance to you while you're in hospital?" And I'd just come from home, hadn't had any breakfast, hadn't, you know, it was sort of. I don't think I was in yesterday's clothes, but I was feeling pretty crusty, you know, and I sort of said, "Look, I can't get around a hospital like this on my own, and I'm desperate for a coffee. You go and could you possibly find me a coffee somewhere?" And she went off and came back a few minutes later with the biggest, blackest cup of coffee she could find, and she was our friend forever.
Amazing.
So, you know, so just someone who used common sense about a situation, and who greased the wheels and made a traumatic sort of incident much more bearable, because someone came along and adulted at us.
Yeah,
made a huge difference.
You have a son who is 2.5, and Eliza, I think you have, is it 7-year-old and 2-year-old?
Yeah, that's right. I've got a 7-year-old and a 2-year-old.
Yeah.
Speaking of the 2-year-old, I'm just going to go quiet him down.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Yeah, let's talk about kids. One of the things, and this is actually what happened to me when I was in the hospital having my first child, what I kept kind of hearing from a staff at the hospital over there. My son was like, 2 days old, and they were already saying how he's going to look after me, and how he's going to be a wonderful person that's going to care for his mum, and he'll always make sure that I'm safe. I wasn't quite I just couldn't process at the time what they were saying, and later on I did have a few comments like that here and there, and I'm just thinking like, no, actually I'm the adult here, I'm the parent, I'm the responsible one, and I do take a charge. And why on earth you're putting all this weight on this child's tiny shoulders? Like, he's not my carer, he's my child. What are your thoughts on that? Like, have you had any experiences similar to that, or how does one actually assert themselves as a parent in spite of all of those kind of commentary and expectations?
Yeah, I mean, do you want to go first, Leah, or do you want me to speak?
You go first.
Okay.
Stop settling, Max.
All right. Yeah, look, I've had that many times before. I can say it in this. I probably wouldn't say this, anymore publicly, but my dad actually says that now, that it's so great that I've got a 7-year-old. At least I've got a 7-year-old who can help look after the 2-year-old. It's like, in what world does a 7-year-old look after a 2-year-old? And why do you think that I am that incapable to look after my child? But again, that's just ableism, isn't it? And this idea that we can't do it. And often in society, like out in the community, I get that all the time, that, oh, isn't it great that, you know, she's looking after you because maybe she's holding my hand. And, you know, sometimes she does help me up a step, and sometimes she does, you know, help me walk across a road. She likes to pull me actually when I'm walking, because she's always afraid that we're not going to make it. Yeah. But that's not her like caring for me. That's I'm still her carer. I'm still her parent. I'm still capable of being the parent. So I still think it's this real assumption that, you know, we're being looked after by our children. It's just very, very wrong, and ultimately it's ableism. But I think, you know, the flip side of that, I guess, is that in having children that not caring for us, but are learning the skills of being kind and, you know, helping when they choose to, or when they when you might need it up a step, or whatever that looks like. I don't think that's a negative either. And I think that, you know, for me, I can really see that in my 7-year-old daughter, is just this really kind, caring individual that I think in the future as an adult will then that'll be a real positive. So yeah, ultimately we're not being cared for by our children, but I also think that there are some skills that you learn by just being there to help, I probably would say is not necessarily a negative. That's my opinion.
I would say we haven't had a lot of that. We did, because of COVID, I think. The lockdowns meant that we have not been out in the sometimes very ableist world all that often. And it's only been recently that we've started to do that. We did experience some of that. Like, I think we were probably in hospital with Max for a little bit longer than most people would be. In part because we were sick with gastro when he was born, and it took them a little while to do kind of what they call the mothercraft with us, because we were too sick. But also I think there were some midwives who were just a bit worried about how we would manage, and some of them didn't voice that and just kind of tried to help us. There was one midwife who came in really, really kind of worried at the start of the session with us, and then when she saw that we had worked out ways we were going to change Max, ways we were going to feed him, that it was just about explaining to us verbally rather than showing us visually what she was doing, she did a complete 180 and was really on board and really on deck with us. But that experience in particular is, I find, in some way, that when you get that from people who are in positions of power over you, that feels like it's a double blow, because you worry, you know, who are they going to report back to? Is this going to mean you have to deal with more official people? Is it going to mean you have to deal with child protection?
Yes.
That's a worry. And I sometimes suspect that medical professionals don't realise that the way they present things can really amplify that worry for you.
Mm.
Yes, I'd concur with that totally, in especially in that sense that they don't realise to a very great extent how much the patterns of behaviour get you back up. And and just you are sort of on notice in these kind of environments when you're allowing yourself, or you've got no choice but to be a bit vulnerable, and to where in these situations you are at the mercy of the good sense of others. And
Yes.
And to have a bad experience is not only shocking and insulting and distressing and disruptive, it leaves you absolutely wary on your guard for it to happen again. And I think on the whole, we were very, very fortunate. But it took a while, I think, to sort of relax, especially around the time Max was born and we were in the hospital with him after the experiences that we'd had at the hospital previously with the miscarriage, that some aspects of that stay had been so objectionable and so inappropriate that it took a while for us to dial down and realize, actually, people, most of these people, if we speak to them rationally and politely and that sort of thing, they're going to be swung around to our way of thinking. But yeah.
Thank you for that. That was so well put. I'm conscious of time and there's so much I want to ask you, but I'll just kind of finish with one last question. So I really want to open that for our audience to kind of to talk to you. You've very candidly and shared your stories in this book alongside 23 other people. I just want to say thank you. And I want to ask you, why this book? Why these stories? What were you hoping to achieve with this? Eliza, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start with that. Why this book? So this book was because I felt really alone, and when I was a disabled parent, I just felt like, I mean, you look online and often, especially then, which was eight years ago, that it was very slanted towards the narrative of that it would be a real burden for a child to have a parent with a disability. And I guess I just wanted to change that, because I knew that that wasn't the correct way. It wasn't the way that I wanted people to see disabled parents. And it was, I guess, being that representation so that future people with disability could feel less alone and know that it was possible. And potentially, if they faced discrimination like I faced, that they could then reach for a book like this and say, no, that's not true, what medical professionals are saying, and that being a disabled parent is possible. And yes, we do adapt and constantly problem solving, and that there are I guess a community out there of people that are really just in a way just like you, and that it's going to be okay. Ultimately, that's what it was like for me. I really wanted people to feel that. And I love when disabled people have reached out since the book's been out and saying that they had faced discrimination, or that they had been told by their mother or their father, their family, that they shouldn't be a parent, and that this book has made them realize that it is possible and that they can. That to me is very exciting. And I think the other space that I really wanted it to reach was for non-disabled people as well. Like I've had people that have written and saying that their minds have been changed, and that they had held ableist views around parenting with disability, and that they hadn't known about these way and these stories, and that it's ultimately changed their opinion. That to me again is very exciting. And also medical spaces, and there really is so much discrimination that happens in those spaces. Like, I think there's also a lot of great change as well. Like, I want to state that, and a lot of people stepping in and wanting to learn, and that there's a lot of change and really, really great change. But still, there is also a lot of discrimination that keeps happening, a lot of ableism that keeps happening, especially in hospital spaces. And for parents with an intellectual disability,
yes,
still, I feel like that's one of the biggest issues. And 60% of parents with intellectual disability have their children removed without any support in place, without any education in place. And as we all know, parenting is hard, and it's hard for anybody. So when you have an intellectual disability, to be not given that support, I just feel is such a large issue, and one that I hope this book changes, because in the book you hear of parents with intellectual disability that have had to go into the court system and have had to fight for their right to keep their children, and now have thriving, successful families.
That's a beautiful and painful story. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that's why for me.
Thank you, Eliza. And Leah and Ben, would you like to talk about your why?
Do you want to go first this time, or shall I?
I'll go first.
Okay.
It's the endless tussle about who went first last time.
I love it.
My personal reason for getting involved with the book was one of the ones that Eliza touched on, and it was particularly the dimension of the sighted, the non-disabled readership. And a few years ago, I was very, very struck by something a friend of ours said, who's well up in disability advocacy circles and whatnot, and we were having drinks, and she said, I do more for disability advocacy turning up to my kids' parent-teacher interviews than all the work than the other work I do. And that really resonated with me, and with the way I like to swing people if I can, and that's to normalize the state of being disabled, or the state of being blind, and just to create this competing narrative with the pity porn and all the stuff that goes on, with one of us being ordinary people who have families, jobs, lives that are more or less successful than anybody else's. And I wanted this opportunity for the mystique to be taken out of our lives as disabled people just that little bit, and for people to eventually view disabled people being parents with complete indifference. So what? Of course you're parents. Exactly. Leah, would you like to say?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't change our involvement in this book for the world. But one of the decisions I made we made together really, but I was quite conscious of in telling this story has been unexpectedly hard. So I made the conscious decision just in discussion with Ben to talk about the miscarriage as well as Max. And that felt particularly important because when I had the miscarriage, we made the decision consciously to tell people that that's what had happened, rather than this thing of, when sometimes people don't talk about miscarriage. And what we found in doing that was that we knew a bunch of people who had them and we didn't know.
Exactly.
And they came and told us their stories, and they were so generous and giving in those stories that it made some sense. And I don't think we touched on it explicitly in the way the story is told in the book, but I think miscarriage has a different effect on you if you're disabled, and that's not just about your interaction with the hospital system. That is particularly if you have not had a child already, in that space where you're questioning whether or not, is it okay for me to be a parent because there are so few disabled parents, or how am I going to do this? A miscarriage feels different. It felt to me different. It felt a bit like possibly maybe a sense that I shouldn't be a parent. Maybe this is not the right thing for me to do. It reinforced some of the ableist ideas that I had already held. And then in having Max, I have realised that is not the case. So I wanted to tell the whole story. I really felt that even though it's been unexpectedly very hard for me to see that story out and about, and to have to think about it more and to relive it, and that is the price of telling these stories sometimes, I am very, very glad that the story is out there for, particularly for other women and other disabled women to see.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's, I guess, it's such a generosity that I cannot, I guess, express my gratitude on behalf of the entire community with disability, but also broader. I feel like I could be talking to you all night about this and telling some of my experiences, and also kind of delving a bit more into yours and some of the other stories in the book. But all I can say is that Eliza and Ben and Leah, we really got this. We totally got this. So thank you. And I'll hand it over now to Leanne. So she's going to share with us a couple of questions from our audience.
Sure,
Fire
thank you.
away.
Thanks so much for your wonderful sharing in that conversation. I think it's really great also, Vildana, to have your perspective as well in the conversation. So everyone who's joined us, you're welcome to submit questions through the chat box. If you're using a screen reader, you can access that through Alt-H. A couple of questions that have been submitted prior to today, which I might get started with, is obviously it takes a village to raise a child, and whether you have a disability or not, we rely on much larger networks to help us in raising our children. So what has been helpful to you in your parenting journey? What has been most helpful to you in working with you to support you raising your children?
Oh, would you like us to start with that, perhaps?
Sure.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay. I think we did not have the village during the COVID lockdowns. We had the four walls of our townhouse in Melbourne, and that was both harder and easier, I think, because as I said earlier, it meant that we weren't kind of outside facing all the ableism when Max was really little. We got this cocoon of time to ourselves, and that was actually quite affirming in its own way. But then we decided after the big long lockdown that we wanted to move to country Victoria to be closer to Ben's family, who live in Traralgon, which is where we are now. And it's been wonderful, I think, to have family support just in the way it is for other people. There are some things about the way that family support is set up that are a little bit about our disabilities, but not too much. Like Max goes to swimming lessons with his nanny and Olpa, and that's in part because that's actually a difficult thing for us to do with him. But it's also that Olpa likes going down the water slides with Max, and it's it brings a different dimension to their time with him. So I think I would say that's been the biggest kind of support we've had from family.
Yeah.
Did you want to add anything to that, Ben?
No, I'd wholly agree with it. It's really been a watershed having it. And even when we had the lockdowns, even just being able to, the times that they could visit, once or twice they were able to take him for a night.
Oh my God.
And just that absolute blissed out, slack-jawed relief that every new parent experiences when they get to sleep in the same bed at the same time after months of being awake, a couple of times a night to do for the baby. Yeah, that's just pretty stupendous, whether you can see like a hawk or not. So so that was certainly a real relief to us when it could be arranged in between the lockdowns when we were living in Melbourne. But I completely agree with Leah about the dimension that's come to us since living closer to family, and we can have more of that incidental contact throughout the week, and Max can have a meaningful relationship with his grandparents, as well as providing us with the time to do things like work and stuff like that. So no, but having family has been key to the happy life we've had out here.
And before Eliza jumps in, I think I'd just add one thing. There are some things that we've consciously, I think, decided not to ask them for help with. So Max is in daycare 2 days a week, and that means hauling a car seat in and out of a taxi twice a day and taking him over to the daycare centre, especially during winter now. It's too far to walk in this weather. And we do that rather than asking Ben's mum and dad to come around with the car seat, because that's just something we should be able to do and something that we value doing, even if it's a pain in the bum sometimes.
and the relationship with the centre itself and the staff who work there is really, really important, that we be seen as the primary contacts, as the people with whom they should have a relationship. That's a really important message to send.
Yeah, absolutely. Eliza, over to you.
I was just really going to echo everything you said in terms of just, I do have family support, and it's great in terms of just taking some of the load. I also rely on NDIS in terms of just house and home support. So I guess, and friends as well. Like, I live in a really great community in Castlemaine, and when I had my second child, it really did feel like a bit of a village going on. Even though we were in, thrust of COVID lockdown, they still delivered food at the door. And so I definitely feel like that's been a really great positive.
Thank you. So a question from Rachel for Leah and Ben is, how do you travel around the community with Max, with your child and a guide dog? How do you do that safely?
With some care. So Max has been in a pram up until, well, he's still in a pram, but he's getting a bit big for it. And there is exactly one pram that you can get in Australia that you can pull behind you. We bought a different pram thinking that, this would be a fairly standard kind of feature, naively. And it really wasn't. That pram nearly tipped when Max was very small. And we very quickly moved on to other options suggested by an orientation and mobility instructor. And so while Max was little, he's been in the pram pulled behind us and using our cane or our guide dog with the other hand. And now that Max is getting a bit bigger, he's starting to use a leash backpack. So this is just, it looks like a normal backpack, and it's got a little leash that you can clip on the back of it and have tied around your hand. And so the leash is not very long, which is really helpful. And thankfully, he doesn't mind it. He's actually been pretty good about us using it. Did you want to say anything else?
No, they're the main things. I mean, because I'm a bit longer in the body, I've made a bit more use of body carrying, like a body sling. So there's a waist strap and shoulder, like a backpack essentially, and ours can work front and back, so you can sit against your chest facing away from you, or against your back. I think technically you can sort of set it up into like a piggyback mode as well. But I get the sense they might be a little bit more popular with men, or just taller people as a general rule. Are the ones who seem to be able to get the more mileage out of a sling. But that's good, because especially you can. I really liked it because it meant that he was, especially when he was little, was always within the arc of my cane. I didn't have to compensate for him when pulling the pram, though that is something that you get used to as well. Just towing the pram and keeping it aligned with your body, and even though the pram itself is a pretty god awful thing, we had a lot of success with that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and would you mind mentioning the brand of the pram that you use?
It's a Steelcraft.
It's a Steelcraft, but I think they make a number of models of pram. I know Harry from Cedar would be able to tell us what the model is, and it's probably written on our pram somewhere. But Steelcraft is as far as I can remember.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact make either. Sorry.
No worries. Fantastic. Well, we might finish up there. Thank you so much, Eliza, Ben, and Leah, for your sharing this evening. Really, really grateful to hear directly from you about your process of contributing to this wonderful book, and sharing your own personal experiences. It's always really wonderful to learn from that lived experience. So our next in conversation will be on September 9th. We'll be hosting this with the Melbourne Writers Festival, and we'll be welcoming Solari Gentile, who'll be speaking to us about her mystery crime writing. So look out for the Vision Australia Library newsletter for more information about that one. When we exit today's session, you should be taken to a short survey. So we invite you to fill in that survey, and we really welcome your ideas for future guests that you might like to have us host in our In Conversation series. So thank you again. Have a wonderful evening, and we hope you can join us next time for In Conversation. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Vision Australia.
Blindness,
low vision,
Opportunity.
Vision Australia logo. 3 navy blue ovals linked together diagonally within a bright yellow rectangle.